So today we'll have a look at a few techniques we can explore inspired by the new Moog Labyrinth synthesizer. Of course, I added also these techniques to the PDF of tips and tricks I keep on updating. So if you're interested, it's available on my Patreon together with the project files from this video and from other videos. Now the first technique is blending between two trigger sources while affecting the velocity of each source. So in the original synthesizer, we have an envelope generator trigger mix, right? We have two sequences and we can crossfade or choose which sequence will trigger the envelope, sequence 1 or sequence 2, and blend between them together with their amplitude. So in Bitwig, I already have here a voice setup and two trigger sources, right? I'm just mixing a few oscillators. And I have one sequence here with 8 steps. It will sound like this. And I have another sequence with 5 steps. Now the easiest way of doing something like this in Bitwig is instead of blending between the triggers themselves, we will blend between two envelopes and use the mix to control the amplitude of this voice. Now there are many modules you can use to control an amplitude of a signal, but in this case we will use the multiply module. Under math, we have here multiply. I will add this after the mixer. With this module, we can use an external signal to control the amplitude of our voice, and this will act as a VCA. If you are familiar with the modular environment, a VCA is basically a multiplier, so this module will work perfectly. So now we don't need anymore the original attack decay envelope, and we will use two other envelopes, one for each trigger source, right? So we will use one, trigger it with the 8-step sequence, and I will use another one and trigger it with the 5-step sequence. And now we just need to blend between them, and again, we will blend between the two envelopes. So we will use the blend module and we will use the blue outputs here, which are the envelopes themselves. And this will go and will control the amplitude of this voice via the multiply module. Right, so now if I take the blend all the way to the left, we will have the 8-step sequence. And if I take it all the way to the right, we will get the 5-step sequence. Maybe we can make this even a bit different, the envelope a bit more snappy. Right, 8 and 5 with a snappier envelope. And again, now with the blend, I can blend between them, and this will also have an influence on the velocity, on the amplitude. Right, so let's say that we want mostly the 5-step sequence and we can blend in the 8-step just a bit. Or have the 8 and blend the 5-step sequence just a bit. As a sort of a ghost notes. And of course we can use this also for other parameters and not just for amplitude, right? We can, or not just for volume or velocity, we can use this also, for example, to modulate the filter. Right, and we can have also the velocity or amplitude variation. And of course, we can also crossfade and modulate this blend and crossfade between the two sequences. Here I have an LFO that I can use to make this for us, right? So it will blend between the 5-step and then slowly crossfade to the 8 steps. Right, so we are crossfading between two different sequences. I have here a few more voices. Just for context, I have here a kick, hi-hat, and a chord. And Another morphing feature on the Moog synthesizer is the ability to morph between two types of filters. We have here a low pass and a band pass. So in this case, in Bitwig, I'm using the effects grid. For now, as you can see, the signal goes directly to the output. It sounds like this. Right, but again, I can use a low pass filter. Or I can use a bandpass filter, both of them are modulated. Right, and again, the fun starts when we morph between them. So for this, we can use, let me disconnect this, we can use the split module that will look like this. With it, we can send one signal to multiple destinations while morphing, scanning between the outputs. So the input signal will be this voice that I'm using, and then it will go once to the low pass and once to the band pass. And this is then I'm mixing, I'm adding here a bit of a heat just for fun. Right, so now this will go for now just to the low pass, and to scan between them we can use something like the value module. Right, we connect this to the scanning input, and then right, I can slowly scan. You can see this here with the yellow light here. Right, I can scan back and forth through low pass to band pass. Right, and of course we can, in Bitwig, use even more filters. I have here also a high pass filter. So what we have to do, we have to add more outputs. I just click this and here we have outputs. I can set this to 3 and then connect this to the high pass, and then we have low pass, band pass, high pass. And I have here also the vowels filter. Right, so again, I just add another another output port, and this will go to the vowels. So now we have another filter. And we can also modulate this morph or blend. I have here an LFO. Right, so now we are sending the voice, we are morphing between the outputs, and each output is a different filter, mixed, going through some heat. I have here a few more voices again, just for context. A kick, a hi-hat, and a bass. Another interesting sound design technique we can learn is using a filter and the wave folder in parallel, so sending the signal to both the filter and the folder at the same time, and then again blending between them. Right here we have the different routing options. You could see when it's set to parallel, we can blend between the wave folder and the filter. And again, in Bitwig, I'm using the effects grid. For now, the sound I have here is going directly to the output. It will sound like this. But you can see that I'm also sending the signal to a modulated low pass filter, right, and also to a wave folder. Now this I'm blending, right, so I can choose between the filter and the folder. For now it will be just the filter. Here at the end of the chain I'm using another filter just to have a bit more control, but for now it's open all the way, it has no effect, right? So this now will be just this low pass filter. And I can blend, morph to the wave folder, maybe fold this a bit. Right, and again blend between them to taste. So let's say I want mostly the filter sound with a bit of the wave folder. Right, something like this. And I will close this other filter a bit. I can also add some modulation just to add some movement. Right, so we get more or less of the folder. Right, so again, using a filter, a low-pass filter and a wave folder in parallel, blending between them, mixing the sound. Again, it's an interesting sound design technique. I have here a few more voices. I have here a kick, clap, bass and harp. The last technique I want to show you is how to add randomness according to probability, similarly to how the corrupt functions work on the labyrinth, right? We can lock sequences, have them fully random or have them mostly looping but changing ever so slightly. Now in Bitwig, in this case, we will use the note grid. I have here already a simple setup. Basically, I'm triggering the dice module. This will generate random values and I'm quantizing this with the pitch scaler and pitch quantize. It will sound like this. Right, now if I add, for example, the chance module before the dice, right, so the triggers will go first to the chance module, I can control the probability of change. So if I change this to 100%, there's a 100% chance that the dice module will be triggered and will generate a random value. Right, if I take the probability all the way down, there is no chance that the dice module will be triggered, so there is no change in notes, there are no new values or new notes being generated. And exactly like this, we can use this idea to build a sequence. So we will build an 8-step sequence. We will need 8 of them, right? So we have 2, 4, and 8. Now to switch between them, to switch between the 8 steps of the sequence, we will use the merge module. We have to set this to 8 steps. Unfortunately, it will go only up to 8. Right, so we have 8 steps of the sequence. We also need to change this to nearest instead of linear. So it will not crossfade between the steps, but rather switch between them. Now we send the steps, each of the combination of chance and dice, to each input here of this merge module. The result of this will go back to the quantizer. And now to switch between the steps, we need a phase signal. Right, so in this case, we will use the phase counter. Right, it's already set to 8, which is great because we have 8 steps. This will go and will switch between the values. We can trigger it with the same triggers we are using to trigger our voice for now. And we just have to make sure it stays in sync. So under I/O, we have the transport playing module that will output a trigger whenever we start and stop the grid, basically. So if I connect this to the trigger input, it will just trigger, it will reset the counter every time we hit play. And now let's set up a microcontroller to change the probability of each of the steps, right? Each step will have its own probability, right? So we can set a microcontroller for this. Again, we will use the value module and the modulator out, right? So like this, we can control the probability. And all I have to do is just map this to each of the probability or the chance parameter here on the chance modules. Right, so now if I turn this all the way up, we have a 100% probability. You don't see this on the module itself, but we have here again the microcontroller. Now there's a 100% probability that there will be a change in note. Let's listen to this. But again, if I take this all the way down to 0, now there is no chance for change, and we have a looping 8-step sequence. But we can add just a bit of probability, right? And then have things slowly evolve. Right, maybe even less, something like this. Right, so now we mostly have an a looping 8-step sequence, but because we have some probability here on the chance modules, there is a chance that some of the steps will change and we will get something a bit more with variation. Right now we can do this also for the triggers. We don't have the triggers also play all the time. We can have also probability for the triggers and also lock them. Right, so first of all I will disconnect the triggers from the output here and I will duplicate this setup including the counter. Right, so now we have basically the same setup here, and this we will use for the triggers, and we will do this with logic. Right, so if we will add an AND logic, and I will show you this also on the scope, and I will set this now to fully random again with the macrocontroller. Later we will have a different macrocontroller dedicated for the triggers. But now basically we have a random sequence and you can see it's going up and down. Now above a certain point, right, maybe it's somewhere here for example, above a certain point, Bitwig or the grid is considering this signal as an open gate, right? It just has to go above a certain threshold. So if we use AND logic and we use once the sequence and once the triggers, only when both of them, only when the triggers and the sequence are above a certain point, above this certain threshold, we will get a trigger. And let me show you this. Right, so you see, again, because we have a random sequence, this will happen also randomly. And because we can change the probability, we can change the chances of this, but only when they are both above a certain point, we get a trigger. So let me get rid of this, and now the AND module will go and will trigger the voice. Right, and again, now it's fully random, but we can lock it. And now we have looping pitch and looping triggers. But what we will do is we will have a different macrocontroller for the triggers. Right, so we can lock the pitch and have these triggers more evolving, or lock the triggers, have the pitch more evolving. Right, so first of all I have to get rid of the mapping because we duplicated this. I have to get rid of the mapping that I did before here, and now I can map the new macrocontroller, and again just map this so it will take it to 100%, and we can have everything between 0 and 100% chance that there will be a change. Right, so for example, again, now we can have this looping triggers, but the pitch will always change. Or we can have static pitch and the triggers will always change. And again, everything in between, we can have things that are more evolving, and we can even have different lengths for the sequences. So for example, the pitch sequence can be 7 steps, the trigger sequence can be 5 steps. And again, we just lock them a bit, we have a bit of probability that there will be a change. So now we have a bit more variation, things are more evolving, they are changing. We have probability for pitch, we have probability for triggers, we can lock and loop the sequences, we can have them fully random. You can use this as a performative tool, you can use this with modulation to create again movement and variation. Once again, I have here a few more voices, a kick, hi-hats, clap, bass, and the lead sound. Alright, and that's it. I hope you will go and explore some of these ideas, some of these techniques. Come join us on Patreon and Discord. Thank you for watching. Cheers.